At 3 a.m., the frigid silence of Novorossiysk, the most secure harbor in Russia's Black Sea Fleet, was shattered by terrifying sounds. Sailors froze as collision alarms blared. On radar screens, 12 fast-moving targets suddenly materialized from nowhere, racing toward the harbor entrance at 57.5 miles per hour. These were Ukrainian unmanned surface vessels, USVs, each packed with enough explosives to rip a destroyer in half. The Russian response was immediate and ferocious. Shore-based Pantsir air defense systems lowered their barrels horizontally and opened fire. From the decks of moored warships, Tor M2 missile systems joined the fight, launching interceptors at close range. Within just 8 minutes, it was over. All 12 USVs were reduced to burning wreckage, sinking to the harbor bottom. Radar screens cleared. Sailors on the piers clapped in celebration, radioing Moscow, threat neutralized, harbor secure. Floodlights dimmed. Active sonar pulses slowed as operators took breaks to smoke. They slapped each other's backs, convinced the show was finished. But they had made a fatal mistake, focusing on the explosions without analyzing the bigger picture. Those 12 surface drones destroyed in brilliant flames were not the main attack. They were the diversion. Comment number 1 if you support Ukraine, number 2 if you support Russia, and number 3 if you love peace.
While the Russians were busy blasting the noisy decoys, 6 brand-new Toka submerged drones quietly slipped past the outer defensive perimeter. Powered by electric motors, they were completely silent and invisible to radar. The real hunt was just beginning. By 3:15 a.m., the harbor returned to an eerie calm. Active sonar from destroyers eased from frantic search patterns to lazy, steady pings. Russian operators adjusted headsets, ears still ringing from the earlier chaos, unaware that the true threat had penetrated inside. Just 66 feet away, the 6 specialized underwater drones activated their thrusters. Unlike their surface brothers, these machines did not roar, they whispered.
Equipped with high-torque electric motors, they glided through the water with the sound of drifting timber. Each carried a 500-pound high-explosive warhead, guided not by human operators, but by onboard artificial intelligence integrated with inertial navigation. They needed no GPS, no radio signals, just a path. And in their zeal to eliminate the surface decoys, the Russians had unwittingly cleared that path. The massive shock waves from earlier blasts had not only destroyed the decoys, but also shaken the harbor's heavy anti-torpedo nets. The steel mesh, designed to stop submarines, had shifted just enough to create a 6-foot gap near the seabed. It was a narrow slit, but for these 6 mechanical sharks, it was a wide-open door.
By 3:22 a.m., in the harbor's sonar room, a Russian operator monitoring the passive sonar display froze. His headphones caught an anomalous low-frequency signal barely above background noise. He shouted, "Underwater contact, slow-moving in Sector 4." Base defense crews reacted without hesitation, activating anti-sabotage protocols. Shore-mounted active sonar arrays surged to full power, blasting 235 dB of acoustic energy into the water. This was a brutal sonic assault that instantly stripped away the Ukrainian machine's stealth coating. At the same time, DP-65 automatic grenade launchers on the piers swung into position. Not a soldier with a rifle, but a robotic turret linked directly to sonar, calculated firing angles, and unleashed 10 RG-55 high-explosive grenades.
The small projectiles arced through the air, splashing down in a perfect deadly circle around the contact point. They sank to a preset depth of 39 feet and detonated. Physics took over. Because water is nearly incompressible, the shockwave propagated at 3,300 miles per hour without dissipating, striking with hydraulic press force.
The two lead Toka drones were caught in the high-pressure zone. The shockwaves slammed their composite hulls, shattering delicate optical sensors and cracking battery compartments. On Ukrainian control screens, two video feeds instantly filled with static and went dark. The Russians had scored first blood, the score temporarily 1-0 for the Kremlin.
But Russian jubilation came too soon. They assumed they were dealing with conventional dumb torpedoes. They were wrong. Meet the Toka TLK-1000, Ukraine's latest nightmare for the Black Sea Fleet. Unlike traditional torpedoes that run straight until impact or fuel exhaustion, the Toka is an underwater glider with a 1,312-yard range, powered by silent electric propulsion. The Russians had just expended prime ammunition destroying scouts, unaware that the real predators were still circling in the dark, ready to execute a maneuver no standard torpedo could perform.
By 3:26 a.m., the Russian port commander proved he was no amateur. Recognizing the noisy targets might be decoys, he ordered a Grachkan-class anti-sabotage vessel to deploy its ace, the Marlin 350 remotely operated vehicle. This small yellow submersible, fiber-optic linked, was equipped with high-intensity LED lights and high-resolution cameras. It plunged into the black water like a mechanical hound. Simultaneously, a Raptor-class patrol boat raced to the suspect area and dropped two heavy BB-1 depth charges from its stern rack. When they detonated, they produced no fireball, but extreme pressure, up to 21,300 psi. Water acted like a solid hammer. The shockwave caught one of the four remaining Toka drones. The impact was brutal, snapping carbon fiber stabilizers and breaching the battery compartment seal. Salt water flooded in, shorting the main circuit. The drone died instantly, spinning uselessly into the mud.
3 drones remained, but their camouflage was blown. The Marlin ROV reached the seabed, its lights sweeping through murky silt like a flashlight in a dusty attic. Then the surface operators saw it. On screen, the sharp black silhouette of a Toka drone glided past the camera, just yards from the massive rubber-sheathed hull of a Kilo-class submarine. The operator yelled into his headset, "Visual contact, object attached to hull." This was the final gamble. If the ROV operator could guide a depth charge precisely to that spot within the next 30 seconds, the mission would fail. If the submarine crew blew emergency ballast, they might surface and use the hull to deflect the blast.
Ukraine was out of time, out of stealth, and facing confirmed kill orders. At 3:27 a.m., the operator in Kyiv made the hardest call in drone warfare. He typed a single command: execute sacrifice protocol. One of the 3 surviving Toka drones immediately abandoned stealth. Instead of fleeing, it turned directly toward the Marlin ROV and the patrol boat above. Its electric motor revved to 2,000 RPM, producing a roar that drowned out everything else in the harbor.
Aboard the Russian surface vessel, the tactical officer fell into the trap. He saw a high-speed target closing fast. Panic overrode discipline. He shouted, "Engage!" and dropped the second heavy depth charge right over the ROV's position. The underwater explosion was catastrophic. The shockwave destroyed the sacrificial Ukrainian drone while crushing Russia's $200,000 ROV like a soda can and gouging a crater in the harbor floor. Water turned into a blinding mix of silt and bubbles. For the next 10 seconds, every sonar screen in Novorossiysk went white, blinded. Those 10 seconds were all the 2 remaining Toka drones needed. While the Russians celebrated eliminating another decoy, the true killer drones, Charlie and Delta, silently glided through the murk.
They approached the Kilo-class submarine from astern, slipping into the blind spot behind the propeller where the sub's sonar could not detect them. They drifted beneath the black steel behemoth, displacing 3,900 tons. Charlie targeted amidships, right under the lithium-ion battery compartment. Delta aimed at the engineering space near the propeller shaft. The Russian sonar operator finally cleared the interference. He saw two faint blips merging with the submarine's hull signature. He reached for the alarm button, mouth opening to shout, "Prepare!" But he was half a second too late. Contact fuses on both drones triggered simultaneously. 1,000 pounds of high-explosive Torch X detonated on direct contact with the pressure hull. The cat-and-mouse game was over. The trap had snapped shut. At 3:27 a.m. and 1 second, physics delivered the final verdict.
When 1,000 pounds of high explosive detonates underwater against a submarine, a terrifying phenomenon occurs: compression effect. Water is 800 times denser than air and resists displacement. It acts like a solid wall, channeling 90% of the blast energy along the path of least resistance, the steel air-filled tube of the Kilo-class submarine. The blast wave struck the pressure hull at 26,000 feet per second. HY-80 steel, engineered to withstand crushing ocean depths, proved useless against this close-range kinetic hammer of immense power. It did not crack, it tore open. A hole the size of a small truck punched straight through the double hull.
But the explosion was only the beginning. True destruction came from bubble pulse. The blast created a massive, superheated gas bubble that expanded rapidly, displacing water. A fraction of a second later, surrounding water pressure crushed the bubble back. That collapse generated a second shock wave, a water hammer even stronger than the initial blast. Inside the sub, devastation was total. The submarine resembled a shaken soda can ripped open on one side. Seawater surged in at 40 psi, slamming the forward battery compartment. Chemistry took over. Kilo-class submarines run on massive lead-acid or lithium-ion batteries. Salt water contacting charging battery terminals caused instant short circuits, generating thousands of amps. Water underwent rapid electrolysis, splitting into hydrogen and oxygen, a volatile mix awaiting a spark. And sparks were plentiful. A secondary explosion erupted from within. A white column of foam, black oil, and battery acid shot 49 feet into the air, shaking the concrete pier like an earthquake.
Russian sailors on the pier were knocked down. The shockwave rattled command office windows 3 miles away. Then fire erupted, not the kind extinguished by air, but chemical fire burning underwater. Magnesium components in the torpedo room ignited at 5,000 degrees Fahrenheit. The extreme heat warped steel frames of forward caliber cruise missiles in their launch tubes. Propellant inside began to cook off, venting toxic gas into the dying ship.
For a submarine, buoyancy is a simple equation: weight versus displaced water. That equation just broke. With millions of gallons flooding in, the 3,900-ton vessel lost the fight against gravity in seconds. The bow plunged, the stern lifted slightly. The 7-bladed giant propeller spun uselessly in air, tripping oil and mud before slamming back into the water. By 3:29 a.m., the harbor surface settled. The improved Kilo-class submarine, the Russian Navy's black hole, lived up to its nickname in the worst way. It vanished. Where 2 minutes earlier stood a strategic asset worth $425 million, only an oil-filled whirlpool and floating debris remained. The Russian base commander stood on the pier, staring at the empty berth, his face lit by flashing emergency lights. He searched for a submarine now lying broken on the bottom, batteries ablaze, everything finished. The silence that followed was heavier than the blast. The harbor was secure, but the fleet was shattered. Sunrise over Novorossiysk revealed a port reeking of burning diesel and humiliation.
But sinking one submarine was merely the first domino in a chain reaction set to sweep the entire Russian Navy. Consider operational paralysis. The Black Sea Fleet had just lost a primary caliber launch platform. A Kilo-class submarine is not just a ship, it is a mobile underwater missile battery capable of firing 4 cruise missiles in a salvo from depths where air defenses cannot reach. By eliminating this asset, Ukraine did not just sink 3,900 tons of steel, it erased 25% of Russia's subsurface missile capacity in the Black Sea. The 3 remaining submarines in the fleet were no longer hunters, they became targets. They could no longer safely berth at Novorossiysk and were forced to withdraw farther east to the occupied Georgian port of Ochimchir. That is a logistical nightmare. Every extra mile adds hours to reload times and reduces on-station endurance. Russian missile blockade effectiveness just dropped by 1/3. Then came the credibility collapse.
At 8 a.m., Russia's defense ministry issued a statement. A terrorist attack plot on the naval base was successfully repelled, no damage to fleet assets. But 5 minutes later, Ukrainian intelligence posted 4K video to Telegram, footage from drone Charlie streamed seconds before impact. It clearly showed the submarine's hull number, panic on the pier, and the final lunge toward the propeller shaft. The internet did the rest. Satellite imagery confirmed a massive oil slick at the submarine's former mooring. Denial became a joke. Psychological shrapnel cut deeper than explosive fragments. Russian commanders began reacting with paranoia. Next day's satellite photos showed Russian sailors painting 2-dimensional submarine silhouettes on concrete piers, a desperate Wile E. Coyote ploy to fool Ukrainian satellites into thinking empty berths were occupied, hoping drones would hit pavement instead of real hulls. It was the military equivalent of covering a gunshot wound with a Band-Aid.
Consider the final return on investment for the night. Ukraine spent roughly $2 million on 12 surface decoys and 6 underwater prototypes. Russia lost a $425 million submarine, 12 expensive torpedoes, dozens of depth charges, and, most costly, the notion of a secure harbor. The lesson from Novorossiysk is brutal. In modern naval warfare, there is no safe rear. If you can float, you can sink. Ukraine proved you do not need a fleet to destroy a fleet. You need patience, artificial intelligence, and willingness to sacrifice pawns to take the king. So the question for you is, if you were the Ukrainian operator, knowing the Russians are now on high alert, how many Sea Baby USVs would you send in the next strike to ensure destruction? Or would you switch tactics entirely? Share your battle plan in the comments. I will pin the best strategy in the next video. Do not forget to like if you think the era of big warships is over, and subscribe to see what happens when 21st century tech collides with Cold War steel. Comment number 2 if you support Ukraine, number 3 if you support Russia, and number 4 if you love peace.